Good afternoon. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. My name is Michael Del Castillo. I'm the senior editor at Forbes, where I help oversee our blockchain and cryptocurrency coverage. Here with Herman Soto Sanchez from
Correct.
Broadridge. Welcome, Herman.
Oh, great to be here, Michael. Thank you.
Before we get started on a little bit about your background and what you do, can you what's your title, and tell us a little bit about what your day job is over at Broadridge?
Sure. So my title is I'm the head of corporate strategy at Broadridge. In terms of my day-to-day job, I really focus on three different things. Right. The first one is sort of the overall strategic planning process for Broadridge. And that's a process that runs throughout the entire year as we have strategic plans for the overall company as well for each of our business units. The second thing is really focused on what I consider to be sort of traditional strategic engagements. Think of it as consulting engagements across Broadridge. And so we tackle a variety of themes at the corporate level. And so my team spends a lot of time focused on that as well. And then the third is innovation. So things like distributed ledger technology, blockchain, and other innovation agenda items I focus on as well.
And for those of our audience that don't know, Broadridge, I like to say, is maybe one of the most important companies that most of our typical audience doesn't know about. So what is Broadridge? How big is it? Give us an idea of like the scope of the company's work, and give us like when we might be conducting business that we don't realize we're accidentally using some Broadridge tech.
No, that's a great point question too. So we're a global fintech leader, right? We're a $17 billion market cap company, 15,000 associates across the globe. And what we do is we power the critical infrastructure behind investing, governance, and communications. And so we do this for banks, for broker-dealers, for wealth asset managers, as well as for public companies. In terms of governance and communications, we have a communications hub that's global that basically connects thousands of companies, wealth managers with tens of millions of institutional and retail investors, right? So that's what we do there. On the investing side, our technology platforms power over 9 trillion of fixed income and equities trades per day.
Yeah.
Again, that's on a global basis.
Per day.
Per day.
Yeah. So our audience all uses your technology at some point in time, likely. They just might
correct.
not know it exactly.
When you think about governance and communication, I mentioned beforehand, if you're an investor and you receive a statement, right, that probably comes from us. Or if you receive a proxy statement or some interim statement as well. From a communications point of view, that comes from us. If you participate in a virtual shareholder meeting, we probably help facilitate that. And again, on the investing side, if you are investing fixed income, equities, we play a role in that. So it really is sort of comprehensive across sort of the investment life cycle.
And I knew your predecessor a bit. He and I had worked together on a couple stories in the past. This is a kind of new job for you. Can you kind of walk us through what were you doing before that got you into the position where you had the ability to oversee all the innovation and other work in this pretty influential company?
So I've been at Broadridge for a little over 2 years. Before Broadridge, I was the president of a fintech company called Cloud9 Technologies. It's in the trader voice industry. And Cloud9 was acquired by Symphony Communications. Now, the thing about it is both of these companies are consortium investments across Wall Street banks. And so before I came to Cloud9 Technologies, I was actually at JPMorgan Chase. I worked in their strategic investments team. And there, I primarily focused on consortium investments, utility investments, which are basically strategic investments made on behalf of JPMorgan Chase, right, into sort of startup entities, these consortiums, and other relevant fintech companies. And so that's what I did there.
And so trader voice is an industry that I think not everybody might be familiar with. What is trader voice?
Yeah, so most of the time when you think about trading, you think about if you want to buy something, you enter it in a computer, it's electronic, and it goes through, it gets executed. The reality is for certain asset classes, not all, but certain asset classes, think of fixed income, think of commodities like oil, et cetera. A lot of the trading happens via voice, right? So think of 80s movies, Wall Street, the trader has 2 headphones and he's talking buy, sell, et cetera.
Yeah.
Essentially, that's what it is today for some of those asset classes, right? So 60, 70% of the trading is via voice. So trader voice is done via a turret, which is really a fancy telephone. So when you hear the terms squawk box or a hoot, holler, shout down, ring down, those are all terms that come from a turret. And so a turret is a piece of equipment, again, a fancy telephone that's been around for decades, right? It uses sort of copper wires, connections, point-to-point connections between counterparties. And so what we did at Cloud9 was we virtualized that, right? So we took what typically is, I need to buy a circuit from an oil desk in Houston to someone in London for oil trading. Well, we virtualized that whole process, which is extremely expensive, takes a long time. And by the way, it's analog, right? So we also digitized it as well.
I like the description of Broadridge as the center of the networks. This idea that there are a lot of networks out there, and Broadridge is at the middle of a lot of those networks. To be a little less PR-y about the term center of the networks, it's a very, very valuable, important middleman. And I remember early on in 2016 when I was starting to write about blockchain and cryptocurrency, and I saw that Broadridge had made this $96 million investment in blockchain-related technology. I was like, ooh, that's cool. What's going on with this Broadridge company? And I kind of started to understand a little bit about how Broadridge is connecting financial markets all around the world and providing a variety of what we now call fintech resources for investors, from proxy voting to helping settle.
And by the way, sort of part of that, as you call it, the middleman is, our fundamental belief is that there are segments of technology which make a lot more sense to be mutualized.
Yes.
Right? Instead of 10 different participants, each investing and building their own sort of platform to do the same thing, it makes a lot more sense for it to be built once and used by many, right? And so that's the approach that we try to champion as well.
So the idea of mutualization, I think, is great. And I want to talk about how is it that Broadridge's position in global finance has allowed it to have insight into early interest in what we called enterprise blockchain 2015, 2016, 2017. What does that look like today? And then kind of work our way to some stuff that's happening in the future. So like as this in this position at the center of this network of networks, what was it that Broadridge was seeing that kind of first made you explore the blockchain space? And briefly walk us through, how did that end up materializing and bring us forward?
Yeah, so look, we are an infrastructure provider, right? And so as you go back many, many years to sort of the promises of distributed ledger technology, blockchain, significant impact on infrastructure, significant impact on costs, on efficiencies, on risk, on transparency, et cetera. And so I think for us, like many, we truly believe in the transformative impact of distributed ledger technology. Now, if you go back many, many years, it really was a solution looking for a problem.
Yeah.
Right. And so to that extent, I think the last several years, what you've seen is now finally some examples are coming to light that are starting to show the value that many of us expected out of distributed ledger technology.
And I want to talk about a couple of those specifically. But before we get to those, I just want to ask the difficult question: is enterprise blockchain dead?
Not at all. Enterprise blockchain is not dead. I mean, look, when we think about distributed ledger technology, we just had a recent survey, our 2023 sort of digital technology, digital transformation and next gen technology study, and about 60% of respondents said that within the next 10 years, DLT will be the core of capital markets infrastructure, right? And so we truly believe this. We truly believe in enterprise. A lot of the things that we've done, they're all on private permission networks.
Yeah.
And we do believe that although there's been some advances on the public side, we still believe that sort of private permission networks for us is the way to go. Obviously, we'll continue to monitor developments, but that's how we feel it today.
One of the things that I think has put Broadridge in the position to see and explore some of the early promise and then to settle on some actual usable applications is the complicated nature of many of your transactions, where it's much more than just two counterparties. There's 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 10, 20 counterparties in a lot of these transactions. And when you start to look at investing workflows that have that kind of really complicated back and forth dynamic, you kind of start to get a little bit of a taste for how, as you put it, mutualizing some of the skills learned could benefit large groups. Can you kind of walk us through maybe, I'll rephrase that. So we put Broadridge on our blockchain 50 list for one particular application. This is the repo application of blockchain. I think that's the biggest application that you guys have today. Would you say that's accurate?
That's correct, and we have a few others as well. But
Let's start with that one. Yeah. First of all, for our audience that doesn't know, what is a repo transaction, and briefly, like, how does it work? Who are the counterparties? And then let's kind of introduce the role that blockchain plays in that process nowadays.
Yeah, so the repurchase transactions, sort of shortened for repo, are vital parts of everyday life for large investors, for capital markets firms. It's how they fund and finance their trading activity, right? And so repurchase transactions, are focused on enhancing liquidity. It's really how you manage that. And so from that point of view, you can have repurchase transactions that take place sort of overnight. They can be intraday as well, et cetera. And so what we did in that space is we developed a platform leveraging sort of VMware blockchain, where market participants can come, they can essentially agree, they can trade, they can track, and they can settle their repo transactions. And again, it's a very important market. It's also a very large market.
Yeah.
It's about 10 trillion per day.
Yeah.
So 10 trillion of repurchase transactions, the volume are happening every single day. So it's a vital part sort of just sort of
and that's 10 trillion
systems.
Globally, right?
Yeah, 10 trillion globally.
And how much of that is going on Broadridge's blockchain solution on a daily basis today?
So right now we are marching our way upwards to about 70 billion.
70. So it was 50 when we mentioned you guys
so
just a couple months ago.
And when we started, so it's been gradually building up, right? So we've surpassed the 1 trillion per month mark already. And so we're picking up significant steam. And right now we've been very focused on intra-party repo transactions within sort of the same company, for example. But most recently, we announced an intraday, cross-border intraday repo transaction as well. And so when you think about it, you can start off with repo transactions within sort of the same company, but it could be the sort of UK affiliate with the US affiliate can have a repurchase transaction.
So let's talk about why that intraday move is potentially so powerful. Was that even possible before the use of distributed ledger technology? Was it just really expensive, or is this like a whole new uncharted territory?
No, it was possible, but what we're doing is essentially we're streamlining, making the process much more effective. Right, it's lower cost, lower risk, right, and sort of our estimates are that when you use a solution such as ours, you save about $1 million for every 100,000 repo trades.
Okay.
Right? So there is a tangible benefit from a cost point of view. Again, this goes back to what we talked about, which are what are those efficiency, risk, cost-saving benefits from DLT? Well, we're starting to see that sort of bear out.
So that $1 million saving, there was $1 million for every
100,000 repo trades.
So where's that savings coming from?
Well,
what is no longer necessary?
So a simple example is a couple of things happen. Right. Number one, some of these transactions are handled very manually. Some of them are recorded on spreadsheets, whether you believe it or not. And then you also have fails, right? So you can actually have transaction fails. And when transaction fails happen, there are fees associated with those fails, right? So you start to chip away at all of those elements associated with the bad side of the repo market, which again is extremely important. But like there are actually so many aspects of modern financial services that people will be extremely surprised at how inefficient and how manual they are today.
Is there an active sort of ongoing effort at Broadridge that's dedicated to DLT? Like, is there a DLT team, or is that kind of mix and match of people with different expertises coming together on a project by project basis?
Yeah, no. So we have about 100 people working on blockchain related initiatives. We do have a center of excellence which has about 40 people or so. Right. So we started it from nothing. A few years ago, it's up to about 40 people. And so as mentioned, distributed ledger is one of our efforts. We have other additional efforts as well. But even within distributed ledger, we continue to work on that, right? So we talked about intra-party, and we also introduced intraday. And there's several other things that we're looking at down the road as well.
Let's do like a bullet point list of like the stuff that this team is working on. So to be clear, when you talk about DLT as a part of the Blockchain Center of Excellence, but not exclusively, you are looking at other applications, maybe more traditional applications of blockchain than DLT as well?
That's correct.
So can you give us like a brief little rundown? Like what are some of your favorites?
Well, just in terms of how we're looking at, obviously we're spending some time looking at the crypto side of things in terms of the market participants and how does the infrastructure side of the crypto market look like, but also just overall, right? Because again, we're an infrastructure company. And so for us, it's also very important to realize the fact that everything that we do today in the traditional asset space will have an analog or a comparable on the digital side.
Okay.
And so we do spend a lot of time thinking about that and experimenting in that space. And so the way we do that is we like to experiment. We like to identify partners and we like to engage.
Okay.
Right. And so that's the approach we take for all of our innovations, the approach we take for blockchain, for digital assets, et cetera.
Do you see crypto innovators as kind of like competitors? Is there like an alternate sort of ecosystem of transactions happening out there separate from what they now call TradFi? Or is there something more separate going on there where they're completely unrelated? What's that dynamic like between Broadridge as a TradFi company that's experimenting and occasionally building and launching live applications and these wild, crazy kids out there building with DeFi and all this other stuff?
Look, I think it's complementary.
Okay.
Right. And this is kind of where DLT sort of in crypto, digital assets, broadly speaking, can come into play, right? Which is there are a number of existing players, right, to touch upon that. When you think about the role of custodians, the role of transfer agents, right, the role of exchanges, et cetera, the infrastructure will likely evolve, right, which touches upon how you leverage the distributed ledger technology and infrastructure side, but also the role will evolve when you think about the broader digital asset space as well. And look, we're not going to be doing everything there, right? So we view it as complementary because there are certain things that we do really well, right? We do communications really well. We do governance really well, right? And also we do certain parts of the infrastructure side really well, such as books and records, for example, right? And so we believe that there are definite spaces and places for us to participate in, to partner with others, and to collaborate.
So when I think back to those early years, like I said, I covered that 2016 asset acquisition. That was my introduction to Broadridge. Around that time was when we also started hearing names like ASX and DTCC, the Australian Securities Exchange, and the Depository Trust and Clearinghouse, which just like, what is it? $1.4 quadrillion in volume a year, massive organization. Very exciting blockchain work. Some of it didn't launch at all. Some of it did launch, and they gave their customers the ability to opt in, and there was no opt-in. Like, how is it that Broadridge has managed to emerge from that same group of early experimenters to having applications that are doing 70 billion in volume a day?
Well, part of, I mentioned that approach where we like to experiment, we like to find partners, we like to engage. A lot of that is focused around the fact that we like to target real world problems.
Yeah.
Right? So we like to target sort of immediate pain points that we see sort of across our customers, across our user base. Right. So repo was just a very natural first example for us to target. Another example that we targeted was SRD2 in the EU. Right. When SRD2 rolled out, we saw an opportunity to create a shareholder disclosure hub, which is one of our solutions. We built that on Hyperledger Fabric, and essentially it takes an existing process where the SRD2 requirements are you have to make information available on new shareholders, right? And when those requests come in, those requests are typically in unstructured data formats. They may not be authenticated. They may not be responded to. So we created a platform that basically sort of streamlined that entire process and enhanced the security as well, right? So a real world problem that we wanted to address, we leveraged distributed ledger technology, and we've assisted over 300 entities now meet their SRD2 requirements in that capacity.
Can you briefly talk about how Broadridge is making money off this? Because I get the $1 million savings for customers. Are you able to charge like a flat fee, or is it like a a subscription service? How is it exactly that you are monetizing the ability to save your customers $1 million for every 100,000 transactions?
Yeah, so basically, there's different ways, right? We can monetize this. So, for example, yes, we can monetize in terms of a fee, sort of on a per transaction basis. For something like SRD2, it can be sort of a fee in terms of a subscription for the service as well, right? We try to be pretty sort of thoughtful in regards to sort of what's the best approach from the fee point of view. Again, the key factor is, are we creating value for the customers, right? And make sure that's first and foremost. And then obviously, yes, we have to be able to monetize that. And look, there are other aspects of the market that maybe we haven't necessarily found how to monetize yet, but we do believe are areas that make a lot of sense for us to at least be engaged in. An example I will give you there is disclosures for digital assets, right? Again, we play a vital role in the disclosure process for traditional assets, but we also believe, I think like many others, that the concept of disclosures are something that will help facilitate the markets for digital assets, right?
Yeah.
And so that's something, there's no requirement for that today, right? There isn't necessarily a process by which you can charge fees for that because no one's required to provide them.
I like that. We talk a lot about lessons that the boring old stodgy TradFi firms can learn from the cool cutting edge crypto companies. But this disclosure element that you're talking about here, this is something that you think traditional financial institutions, and I will include Broadridge in there, has something that they can offer to the crypto community.
That's exactly right. Look, I think, whether you believe in the concept of, regulation by enforcement or you disagree with it, et cetera, the fact of the matter is, we've conducted surveys, but so have many others.
Yeah.
And the surveys are very clear that people want some clarity, right? They want some regulatory clarity, and they think disclosures are good. We find disclosures to always be very good for investors, right? A well-informed investor base is a better investor base. And so we do believe that, so at some point in time, that is something that will be required in some capacity. When we look at other countries, in Canada, for example, you have KYP, know your product, right? And so certain venues that offer sort of trading for cryptocurrencies, for example, they have to provide a know your product report that basically allows you, the investor, to learn about it. There's certain specific information that's provided. And so I think we're starting to see some of those developments in other areas. And, eventually I think we'll see some of that here as well.
That know your product idea is interesting. As I understand it, Broadridge is going through a process of kind of opening up a lot of its services to let their customers kind of customize solutions a little bit more than they used to have control over that. Are you seeing like a push to openness on the way that your customers are integrating with Broadridge?
Look, yeah, I think that there's in this day and age, sort of what are the things that people are looking for? They're looking for componentized solutions. They're looking for APIs. They're looking for a richer experience where basically you can customize it as much as you can. And so that's where data starts to become extremely important.
Yeah.
And people really expect you to integrate data into the solution, integrate things like AI into the solutions, and they want sort of that richer, customized experience for it as well. So it's an absolute trend that we're seeing is going to shape the future.
So speaking of changing demand, earlier this year, we got word that the SEC is going to be looking for some new T+1 requirements here. If I remember correctly, we were still in T+3, in other words, a 3-day settlement time for most transactions as recently as just a couple of years ago. So I remember in the early days of blockchain, there was even a company called T0 that was really making the push to bring global infrastructure financial settlement from 3-day average settlement times to nearly instantaneous or intraday settlement times. Yeah. The fact that we are moving to a T+1 world, and perhaps, dare I say, even approaching a T0 world, is that a natural evolution of technological developments that would have happened regardless of blockchain? Or is the fact that blockchain came around and promised T0, even if only theoretically, part of the dynamic that is helping drive that push?
I think it's a natural evolution.
Okay.
Right? And the reason I mention that is there's so much risk, right? Capital gets tied up in the system. And so naturally, the goal is to start to free up so that capital, reduce that risk. And so as you go from T+3 to T+2 to T+1, you're able to do that, which is really important for a lot of firms out there, right? So I think there was a natural evolution. Now, I do think sort of the advent of things like distributed ledger have helped to accelerate the development and the goal of reaching sort of T+1, eventually T+0. And so I think it's a good thing. Now, the challenge obviously is the existing sort of plumbing and infrastructure, right? How quickly can these companies who now have sort of a deadline, right, be able to get ready for T+1? And so we do think there's going to be a lot of investment in this space as companies get ready, but companies will get ready. And eventually sort of we will continue marching beyond T+1, I think, to T+0.
And if I push back a little bit there, just a little skepticism, there's also where there's risk, there's opportunity, right? Mm-hmm. And there were and are certainly a lot of people making money in those delays. There were a lot of financial opportunities for investors in T3. Yeah, And those opportunities decrease in T2, they decrease in T1. Is there any possibility that we were seeing some willful, slowly adopting because of the opportunities?
You absolutely have people who would like to stop at T+1.
Yeah.
Right? You absolutely have people who want to stop there, especially because there are some people who can say, legitimately, for example, that, hey, there are some things that are best served by having that buffer.
Yes.
Right. And so, because what happens if something doesn't work out, right? And so you can make a case about that. I think, though, that's also where things like the infrastructure and distributed ledger technology come in, which is, all right, so what are the ways, therefore, that we can really firmly address sort of potential issues that are the concerns of these firms? And so when I say we're going to make our way to T+0, I do think eventually, but I do think at T+1, we're going to be there for a bit of time.
There's going to be resistance.
Yeah.
And you did already answer this, but I think it's really important. So I just want to do a follow-up there. What is the opportunity and what is the resistance? Or maybe what is the risk from going from T1 to T0?
Well, I think when you think about sort of just some of the traditional issues, right, associated with sort of the trading and settlement process, as you go from T+1 to T+0, you basically eliminate buffer.
Yeah.
Right. You eliminate a buffer, and so from that point of view, essentially, whether it's an error, whether it's a fail, et cetera, you can't 100% guarantee that existing technology or technology that's being used, infrastructure, is going to take that out of the system.
Yeah.
Right. And so part of the question is, therefore, when these things happen, beforehand, we had some time.
Yeah.
Right. To go back and try to fix things, address what the issue is. Now that's gone.
Yeah.
Right. So it's one of those where, hey, I just took the training wheels off. Now you've got to ride and you can't fall. Right. And so from that point of view, I do think it's going to require some significant adjustment. I really do. But again, there's also on the other side, there's just a lot of benefit as well from eliminating sort of the time, the incremental risk, and the capital that you have to set aside as a result of that incremental risk.
Auditors, accountants, these are all very expensive things that happen during that 3-day delay, that 2-day delay that can be reduced or cut out altogether. Now, we don't have to wait and wonder what T0 would look like. Please do correct me if I'm wrong, but I would maybe argue that DeFi today, as it currently exists, is already at T0. This is decentralized financial applications built using blockchain technology.
24/7.
24/7,
Yes.
7 days a week, always up. It's almost pure infrastructure. There's barely anything except the infrastructure. Are you guys watching that? Are you studying that? Are you trying to take a note, like DeFi platform A just crashed? What happened? How could we prevent that if we were at T0? What does that relationship look like as you're watching the DeFi world unfurl, and how are you taking lessons from that?
And so, look, I think for us, there are a lot of lessons learned, and we continue to watch sort of the DeFi world because we do think so. A lot of this will form the underpinnings as we think about the next 10 years from an infrastructure point of view. So significant learnings. I mean, you have offerings today, right? So Franklin Templeton, for example, has sort of the money market fund.
They were just here a couple days ago.
Okay. Yeah. So 24/7, right? And furthermore, you're using Stellar and so public So that's also another thing that we monitor, right? Because I mentioned beforehand, our efforts are on private permission networks. And so how does that look like? How does that work? And so just a lot of different sort of learnings that we can make. But again, a big concept, as mentioned beforehand, 24/7 accessibility is really a new concept for people to wrap their heads around on a go-forward basis. It's a new paradigm.
Is there one new business model, or is it too early that we can talk about where something with the scale of Broadridge moving to T0 might enable entirely new business models, or is it too early to talk about that?
I think for us, and this goes back a little bit to something I mentioned earlier, we're monitoring what happens to the existing participants in the ecosystem, the value chain, because business models will change, right? When you think about the role, for example, of the transfer agent, in reality, the data is on chain, right? Now, do regulators view what's on the chain as sort of a source of valid truth, right? At the moment, you can't point to and say, hey, look, it's on chain, it's there. You still need a transfer agent. But the fact of the matter is that that's something that over time sort of may change. Furthermore, you have smart contracts, right? So there's also, from asset servicing point of view, the asset servicing process may change because smart contracts may be able to address a number of the elements that asset services do. Custodian, what's the role of custodian going to be in the future as you think about wallets, et cetera? And so we're really monitoring sort of that part of the ecosystem to think through sort of what do they look like in the future? Because I think it's really fascinating. I don't think a lot of these roles will disappear, but they are going to evolve. And I think it's going to be very interesting to see how they evolve over time. My
big takeaway from that is if I'm a transfer agent, I better learn to code. Does that sound about right?
It's a I would say it's an opportunity-rich environment, right? And from a transfer agent point of view, I think there will always be a need, but it's going to evolve. So think about sort of how to evolve with it.
Awesome. To wrap things up, you did mention 3 areas of focus on your job. Mm-hmm. One of which is innovation, and blockchain and DLT is only one subset of that interest. Mm-hmm. Since we spent all this time dwelling on that, if we break that off and throw it away, what else are you paying attention to? What is the most interesting new innovation that you're either actively working on or something that's on the horizon that you guys are paying attention to?
Yeah, so look, I think like everybody else, obviously AI.
Yeah.
But generative AI is something that we're paying attention to. But look, even beyond that, we've
generative AI, really?
And large language models, et cetera, right? So the chat GPT-3, et cetera. I think for us, though, the way we're paying attention to it really is, again, attacking real world problems, right? So how do we think about leveraging AI to reduce costs, right? Reduce development costs, for example. How to eliminate redundant processes, sort of manual processes. And so we've been at that for several years, right? And I think one of the frontiers coming up with AI is indeed sort of how do you think about development costs and how to address that by leveraging AI. So that's one example of something we're looking at. We're also focused on looking at things like overall the role of data across sort of our entire ecosystem, right? And so how do we leverage data and how do we embed data into our decision making? The same thing again applies for AI. I mentioned earlier, which is how do you embed AI into your solutions, into our products? And so that's something, again, as we think about the evolution of what we do, that's front and center. And then you have other areas, think about identity. Is something else that's extremely important, especially today, but also in the digital asset space, right? The concept of identity is, takes on a sort of a totally new sort of different meaning as well there. And so those are some of the areas that as we think about innovation or innovation agenda that we're focused and looking on. And I already highlighted disclosures for digital assets as well as something that we're looking at.
Looking forward to following, especially that one, given my interest in crypto. I think that would be really interesting to see lessons learned from TradFi for distributed ledger applications for disclosures. It's been a real pleasure, Herman. Thank you so much for the time. Looking forward to seeing you again soon, hopefully.
Likewise, Michael. Thank you. Always glad to come here.